These are the aircraft that flew under the swastika during World War II. Fighters, bombers, experimental jets, and captured enemy planes. Some became legends, others were death traps, and a few seemed like fever dreams from a desperate regime. Legendary fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 109. The Bf 109 remains the most produced fighter aircraft in history, with over 33,000 built across dozens of variants. This single-engine interceptor defined German fighter tactics throughout the war, featuring exceptional climb rate and devastating firepower. The narrow landing gear made takeoffs treacherous, but once airborne, it was a formidable opponent that Allied pilots learned to respect and fear. Focke-Wulf Fw 190. The Fw 190 Vöger, or Shrike, shocked Allied pilots when it appeared in 1941, outperforming the Spitfire Mark V in nearly every category. This radial engine fighter featured exceptional roll rate, devastating armament, and a wide-track landing gear that made it far more forgiving than the 109. Pilots loved its rugged reliability and described it as a joy to fly, with power and precision that made it one of the war's finest fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 110. The Bf 110 Zerstörer, or Destroyer, was Germany's heavy twin-engine fighter designed to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. During the Battle of Britain, it proved vulnerable to nimble single-engine fighters and often required its own escorts, exposing the flaws in pre-war doctrine. The type found new life as a night fighter, where its range, heavy armament, and ability to carry radar made it devastatingly effective against RAF bomber streams. Messerschmitt made 262. The Me-262, Schwalbe, was the world's first operational jet fighter and could have changed the course of the war if deployed earlier. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, it was untouchable by Allied fighters when flown properly, and its 430 mm cannons could shred a B-17 in seconds. Hitler's insistence on converting it to a bomber delayed its deployment as a pure fighter until it was too late to matter. Messerschmitt May 163. The May 163 Komet was an absolute lunatic of an aircraft, a rocket-powered interceptor that could climb to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes. It flew so fast that pilots had mere seconds to line up and fire on Allied bombers before their fuel ran out. The volatile rocket fuel killed more German pilots than enemy action, dissolving human tissue on contact, making it as dangerous to its own pilots as to the enemy. Devastating bombers. Heinkel He 111. The He 111 was the Luftwaffe's most recognizable medium bomber, with its distinctive glazed nose and elliptical wings that made it instantly identifiable. Originally designed as a civilian transport to circumvent Treaty of Versailles restrictions, it formed the backbone of the bomber force during the Battle of Britain. By 1943, it was hopelessly obsolete and suffered horrific losses, but Germany had no replacement and kept flying them until the bitter end. Junkers Ju-88. The Ju-88 was arguably Germany's most versatile aircraft design, serving as a bomber, dive bomber, night fighter, torpedo bomber, and reconnaissance aircraft. Fast, agile, and capable of carrying a respectable payload, it remained effective throughout the war in every theater of operations. Over 15,000 were built in countless variants, and it earned a reputation for bringing crews home even with severe battle damage. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. The Ju-87 Stuka is the iconic dive bomber, with inverted gull wings and terrifying sirens that struck fear into the hearts of ground troops. It was a precision weapon during the early Blitzkrieg campaigns, capable of pinpoint accuracy that conventional bombers couldn't match. The Battle of Britain exposed its fatal vulnerability to modern fighters, but it continued flying ground attack missions on the Eastern Front until the war's end. Heinkel He 177 Greif. The He 177 Greif was Germany's only operational heavy bomber and a catastrophic design failure that plagued the Luftwaffe throughout the war. The decision to pair two engines together to drive single propellers created endless mechanical problems and an alarming tendency to catch fire mid-flight. It could carry a massive bomb load and had impressive range, but reliability issues meant it never achieved its potential as Germany's strategic bomber. Arado, Arator Cientos 34 Blitz. The R-234 Blitz was the world's first operational jet bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, virtually immune to interception with its 460 miles per hour top speed. Pilots flew reconnaissance missions over England with complete impunity in late 1944, photographing Allied positions without fear of being caught. As a bomber, it was used in small numbers during the Battle of the Bulge, proving nearly impossible to intercept though production numbers remained tragically small. Ground attack aircraft Heinkel H's 129. The H's 129 was a dedicated tank buster built like a flying bathtub, with heavy armor protecting the pilot and a devastating 75 cannon. It was slow, underpowered by captured French engines, and handled like a brick, but on the Eastern Front, it proved brutally effective against Soviet armor. Pilots called it the can opener for its ability to tear through tank armor, making it one of the most feared anti-armor aircraft of the war. Focke-Wulf Fw 189 Uhu. The Fw 189 Uhu, or OWL, was a twin-boom reconnaissance aircraft with a glazed central nacelle, giving the crew exceptional visibility over the battlefield. Despite looking fragile, it was remarkably tough and maneuverable, often surviving attacks that should have destroyed it and limping back to base. Soviet troops called it the Frame and learned to fear its presence, as it directed artillery fire and called in airstrikes with deadly accuracy. Heinkel H's 123. The H's 123 was a biplane dive bomber that was already obsolete when the war started, yet it continued flying close air support missions until 1944. Ground crews loved its reliability, pilots appreciated its toughness, and ground troops valued its accuracy in delivering ordnance exactly where needed. The type could absorb tremendous punishment and keep flying, proving that newer isn't always better in the brutal environment of close air support. Focke-Wulf Fw 190. The Fw 190F was a dedicated ground attack variant of the legendary Fw 190 fighter, optimized for carrying bombs, rockets, and gun pods. It sacrificed some speed and climb rate for armor protection and ordnance carrying capability, making it ideal for attacking enemy armor and fortifications. Operating at low altitude over the Eastern Front, these aircraft wreaked havoc on Soviet armored formations throughout 1943 and 1944. Junkers Ju-87. Ju-87G was a specialized anti-tank variant of the Stuka, fitted with 237 cannons in underwing pods for destroying enemy armor. Hans Ulrich Rudel, Germany's most decorated serviceman, used this variant to destroy over 500 Soviet tanks in countless combat missions. The big cannons made the aircraft even slower and more vulnerable, but in the hands of an expert pilot, it was a devastating tank killer. Transport and utility aircraft Junkers. Ju-52 M. The Ju-52 M, affectionately called Tante Ju or Auntie Ju, was the German Dakota, a corrugated metal tri-motor transport that hauled everything from paratroopers to ammunition. It was slow, noisy, and obsolete by 1939, but Germany had nothing better and built over 4,800 of them across multiple variants. The type participated in every major airborne operation from Crete to Stalingrad, and thousands were shot down or lost to accidents in the brutal conditions. Messerschmitt MiG-323 Gigant. The MiG-323 Gigant was the largest land-based transport aircraft of the war, a six-engine monster that could carry 120 troops or a Panzer IV tank. Developed from the MiG-321 glider, by adding engines and landing gear, it was hideously vulnerable to enemy fighters and earned the nickname the Bullet Magnet. Entire formations were massacred by Allied fighters over the Mediterranean, with over 200 lost in combat operations attempting to resupply Afrika Korps. Fieseler Phi 106 on 50 Storch. The Phi 156 Storch, or Stork, was a remarkable STOL aircraft that could land and take off from absurdly short distances, like forest clearings and mountain roads. It featured full-span leading-edge slats and trailing-edge flaps that gave it a landing speed of just 32 miles per hour, unprecedented for any military aircraft. It served as an air ambulance liaison aircraft and reconnaissance platform, and famously rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop prison in a daring commando operation. Siebel CL-204. The CL-204 was a twin-engine communications and light transport aircraft that served throughout the war in unglamorous but essential roles. Originally designed as a civilian aircraft, it was pressed into military service and proved reliable, easy to maintain, and versatile enough for multiple missions. Over 1,000 were built, and the type continued in production in Czechoslovakia and France after the war, under different designations. Gotha Go-242. The Go-242 was an assault glider that saw extensive use, particularly on the Eastern Front and in resupply missions to isolated garrisons behind enemy lines. It could carry 23 troops or equivalent cargo, and featured a hinged rear fuselage for easy loading of supplies and equipment. Hundreds were built and towed into combat by Ju-52S and He-111S, with some later converted to powered Go-244 variants using captured French engines. Naval and maritime aircraft. Arado, 196. The Arado 196 was the standard shipboard reconnaissance floatplane carried by German capital ships and cruisers, catapult launched from battleships and heavy cruisers. This seaplane featured excellent performance for a floatplane and even scored several combat victories against Allied aircraft, including the capture of a British submarine. It served from coastal bases and aboard ships, conducting maritime patrol, convoy escort, and air-sea rescue missions throughout all theaters. Bloemenvos Bv, 138, the Bv-138 Sea Drake, or Sea Dragon, was a distinctive twin-boom flying boat used for long-range maritime reconnaissance across vast ocean expanses. It patrolled the North Atlantic, Arctic, and Mediterranean, searching for Allied convoys and directing U-boats to targets with deadly efficiency. The asymmetric defensive armament included multiple turrets that gave it a fighting chance against Allied fighters hunting the Atlantic sea lanes. Heinkel He 115. The Heinkel 115 was a twin-engine floatplane torpedo bomber and reconnaissance aircraft that served throughout the war in multiple maritime roles. It conducted mine-laying operations in British harbours, torpedo attacks against Allied shipping, and long-range reconnaissance missions from Norwegian fjords and Baltic bases. The type could carry torpedoes, mines, or bombs, and proved remarkably versatile despite its ungainly appearance and float-induced drag. Dornier Do-24. The Do-24 was a three-engine flying boat, originally designed for the Netherlands, but pressed into Luftwaffe service after the occupation. It proved excellent for air-sea rescue operations, with good range, exceptional seakeeping, and the ability to land in rough seas that would destroy other aircraft. Production continued in occupied Netherlands throughout the war, and the type rescued hundreds of downed airmen from the frigid waters of the Atlantic and North Sea. Bloemenvos Bv-222, Viking. The Bv-222 Viking was the largest flying boat to achieve operational status during the war, a six-engine monster capable of carrying 92 troops or equivalent cargo. This massive aircraft operated transport missions across the Mediterranean, evacuating wounded from North Africa and resupplying isolated garrisons in the Aegean. Only 13 were built due to resource constraints, and most were destroyed by Allied fighters or caught on the ground during bombing raids. Experimental and emergency fighters. Heinkel He 162 Salamander. The He 162 Salamander, also called the Volksjäger or People's Fighter, was a desperate last-ditch jet fighter made largely of wood and glue. Designed to be flown by Hitler Youth with minimal training, it was rushed into production so quickly that structural failures and engine fires plagued the type. Only about 120 saw any kind of service before the war ended, and the entire program stands as testament to Germany's industrial and strategic collapse. Befehl 349, Natter. The Ba 349 Natter, or Viper, was a vertically launched rocket interceptor, designed for point defense of critical industrial targets against Allied bomber formations. The pilot would be strapped into this semi-expendable weapon, launch vertically from a rail, climb at incredible speed, fire his rockets at bombers, then bail out. Only one manned test flight occurred in February 1945, and it ended in the pilot's death when the canopy separated during launch. Dornier Do 335 File. The Dornier Do 335 File, or Arrow, was a bizarre push-pull twin-engine fighter with engines in the nose and tail, making it the fastest piston-engine aircraft Germany produced. It was capable of 474 miles per hour and heavily armed, but arrived too late to impact the war with only about 40 completed. The rear propeller made bailouts hazardous, so an explosive system was designed to jettison the rear propeller and vertical stabilizer before the pilot could eject safely. Heinkel He Jot 280. The Hein 280 was the first turbojet-powered fighter to fly, beating the Me-262 into the air by several months in April 1941. However, it lost the development race due to persistent engine problems and performance shortcomings compared to the larger, faster Me-262. 3 prototypes flew and demonstrated the feasibility of jet fighters, but production never materialized, and the program was cancelled in favor of Messerschmitt's design. Heinkel He 219 Uho. The He 219 Uho, or OWL, was purpose-built as a night fighter and was probably the best aircraft in that role. Germany produced during the war. It featured tricycle landing gear, ejection seats, advanced radar, and devastating armament that could shred a bomber in seconds with its multiple cannons. Pilots loved it and achieved impressive kill ratios. But bureaucratic resistance and production problems meant only about 300 were built when thousands were desperately needed.